Bioshock Infinite came out in 2013 when I was a dumb teenager unable to articulate my thoughts. For context, being a fan of Bioshock 1, I was really stoked for Infinite. My hype buoyed on by their lofty marketing promises. And I have to admit, I was kind of disappointed. Maybe my expectations were too high, but my opinion of the game just didn't seem to match the broader consensus.
It makes you feel like you're Batman.
It is widely referenced even to this day as an intelligent game, one that pushed the medium forward, and as a prominent example of video games having real artistic value. But now that I'm a big-brained adult in the year of 2020, I decided to revisit Colombia and see if my opinion had changed, and it somewhat has. My experience this time around was worse, and on this occasion I can articulate to you why. To put it simply, Infinite treats you like a child. Bioshock 1 could feel clunky and for sure had flaws.
You're special. You could be a plumber!
However, Infinite insultingly dumbed down everything good about that game. It frustratingly strips the player of choice and agency.
And that's what Bioshock games are about. They're about giving the player a ton of tools and a ton of options and just letting them go to town.
Through its gameplay, you feel like someone who's being forced to go on an errand, and surprisingly, for how much it was lauded for these aspects, it's actually quite immature in how it handles certain subjects, and it says very little of actual substance. Trying to derive fun out of this game is like Homer trying to juice an orange. Yeah, at the end you're left with something kinda nice, but it feels like work getting there, and the amount of joy it brings wasn't really worth the strain on your eyes. And certainly, it's not the mature, thought-provoking masterpiece that people claim it to be. Okay, I know I've made a lot of big statements here, so let's just start backing that up.
I started blasting. Bang! Bang!
Let's start with the weapons.
Hi there.
Bioshock had a Doom-esque array of weapons that you carried in your journey through Rapture, each with their own strengths, weaknesses, and unique situational functions. Additionally, there are different ammo types for increased specialization, like anti-personnel rounds, exploding buck, trap bolts. These upgrades had a genuine weight to them, and in specific scenarios they could come in real handy. Now compare that to the glorified staplers of Infinite's arsenal. All that cool ass stuff I just mentioned, completely gone in favor of a run-of-the-mill 2-weapon system. In Bioshock, since you held on to every weapon, you would use them strategically based on ammo management and the specific scenario you're presented. In Infinite, I'd just keep using the same guns until I was really forced to swap temporarily by a lack of ammo, or some incredibly contrived scenario like there being a ton of enemies spawned really far away and oh, there just happens to be a sniper near you. And then I'm back using my default set as soon as I can. I'm never genuinely choosing my weapons and ammo type for the right situation. I'm just kinda shooting shit at people until they die. The lack of choice and options, and losing a lot of the agency in the moment-to-moment combat compared to the first game, just made me feel kinda brainless. It just feels like I've had a bunch of really cool tools taken away from me, which seems to go against Ken Levine's stated goals. So I don't know what Irrational were thinking with this. If I had to guess, I'd say they decided that the average player is too stupid to handle anything other than a Call of Duty style weapon system, and having to use them in one uninspired shooting gallery after another starts to get pretty dull. You know the fair at the start of the game? I may as well have just stayed there for 10 hours. Yeah, I think I'll go with more damage. I never felt really invested in upgrading and exploring all these different weapons when I could only ever carry 2 at a time. I'm better off just finding 2 that'll do the job and just sticking to it the entire way through. Basically, the weapon system and the weapons themselves in Infinite numbs any sort of sense of thought or a unique playstyle that you could incorporate into your gameplay. You mostly just mindlessly pepper your enemies with whatever's lying around. Rather than me being an active participant in it, it feels like the game is just dragging me along. Oh, and don't get me started on the enemies you fight. These are supposed to be sentient human beings, and yet they behave more like mindless zombies, bum rushing you with no semblance of strategy, even with the difficulty set to hard. This might have worked in the original Bioshock, as most of the environments in Rapture were very closed in, almost claustrophobic, and the deranged, monstrous splicers closing in on you suited the gameplay and the atmosphere. But it doesn't really translate well to the more open environments of Colombia, and it can feel pretty silly just watching your enemies stand still without cover or run at you recklessly. Also, while being bullet sponges were an issue in Bioshock as well, I really must stress just how much the enemies of Infinite soak up damage. The most egregious example of this are the Handymen, Infinite's answer to the iconic Big Daddies. Now, when encountering a Big Daddy, you could choose how you wanted to engage with them. Either head on, which would usually end badly, or you can carefully prep the environment around you, hack machines, place traps, choose your plasmids, use barrels, make sure you have enough of the right ammo to take him down swiftly, or you could just ignore them completely, but then you'd miss out on that sweet Adam. There was a fun element to judging whether or not you feel adequately prepared to take one on, and almost a cat and mouse feel to it. In Infinite, they just chuck a handyman at you every now and then and are like, yo, there you are mate. You now have to spend a gross amount of time flinging your shit at these until they die, while actively trying not to doze into a coma. Which brings me to gear, ostensibly Bioshock's gene tonics, upgrades that improve your character's abilities. But again, Infinite System is a downgrade that leaves you feeling neutered, or like a dumb orc that just uses whatever he's given. In Bioshock, you had to put a little bit of thought into how you spent your atom to build up your character with abilities that suit your playstyle. You were able to use 6 gene tonics in each of your 3 tonic slots. Now for Infinite, I guess Irrational decided, oh, let's just throw items of clothing around the map that randomly generate an ability to fit into one of only 4 slots. We don't want them thinking too hard now. They've got to be ushered into the next boring, pointy, clicky gallery. Overall, Infinite's gameplay strips away a lot of agency and choice from the player in a negative, unsatisfying, almost patronizing way. You could make the argument that, oh, that's the point, it's supposed to be a meta statement that highlights how Booker and you, the player, have no real agency in this vast universe with infinite realities. And to that I say, fuck right off. You don't make a game worse and then say, huh, joke's on you, it's meant to be like that, you moron. Actually, even with the looting, instead of streamlining the process in a fun way, you still have to mash F at everything you see like a Neanderthal. And since unlike the first game you can no longer carry health packs and Eve with you, Elizabeth will now decide to arbitrarily chuck you some shit you might need and bail you out. And again, it's a small thing, but it doesn't feel like I earned that, and it's yet another way where I just feel like I'm not in control. Okay, well, the gameplay is never really why Infinite is placed on a pedestal. It's more about the world building, the intelligent story, the mature themes and characters. That's where the game really shines. Oh my god, guys, do you see? It's heads every time. Oh my... Wait, why is it all? Because it has to be, because that's how it always will be. Oh my god, constants and variables. It all makes sense. It's so clever. I'm coming. What, no reaction?
Grab that lockpick.
Now, Booker is the character you play as, but the person you actually see and hear from the most, the emotional core of the story, is Elizabeth. And let's face it, Comstock and Fitzroy combined just aren't as memorable or as charismatic as Andrew Ryan. So Elizabeth carries a lot of the burden in this game. Quick recap, she grew up isolated and locked in a tower, starved of social interaction.
Are you real?
She wishes to be free, to explore the world. She also possesses this incredible, possibly dangerous power. Now with her character, Irrational have, I imagine intentionally, set up the premise to basically a stereotypical Disney princess here.
I want to see Paris. I want to see everything.
She even kinda looks like one. Now that's actually a really interesting choice, and they have a great base here with which to subvert the common tropes and take things in a genuinely dark and mature direction with their character. Kinda like how Columbia itself on its front looks like a perfect Disneyland, but ends up being far more sinister. Now I'm not saying Elizabeth has to be evil, just there's a lot riding on her and she needs to be interesting and fleshed out, right? Okay, I'm watching a kids movie right now, right? This is a kids movie. Oh my god, there's the little kid under the stairs. She's gonna give that orange to him. Oh no, no. This is so dumb. There you go, kid. That's plus 20 health and minus 4 salt. I mean, I was half expecting random woodland creatures to start popping in there. They went full Disney with their character. A positive, sprightly being full of wide-eyed wonder, completely at ease in all sorts of social interactions. Which, after being locked up for such a large part of your life, yeah, okay. Elizabeth is intelligent, empathetic, selfless. She was completely in touch with social norms, except weirdly when it came to racism.
Why is one bathroom for colors and the other for whites?
It just is.
Seems like an unnecessary complication.
Damn, Elizabeth's woke, bro. Wait, how? Need I remind you, this is 1912. Her father is basically the CEO of racism. She's had nothing to do but read, according to her, on a wide range of subjects. And the racial norms at the time should have bled through in some way. At the very least, she shouldn't be this naively ambivalent. Hell, she mentioned being a fan of the Dimwit and Duke cartoons, which were pretty racist. I guess she got a lot of eye-opening interactions with a diverse group of people. Can you separate her from any other Disney princess? I don't think so. And that's kind of bad for the focal character of your serious, deep game. I mean, I guess she killed Daisy, but it doesn't really change her significantly, and it kind of was just a plot point that happened, rather than an action that was driven by some part of her character development or something. Hell, Daisy was so cartoonishly evil at that point, fucking Cinderella would have shanked her too. All the characters are just so not fleshed out at all. Like Daisy could have had a really cool arc, because she's initially portrayed as someone you might be sympathetic with, but she just flips virtually on a dime, so her evolution as an antagonist wasn't really satisfying. The bad guys are all basically Hitler, there's no redeeming qualities about them. Elizabeth is essentially Rapunzel. Booker has about 30 seconds of dialogue the entire game where he's not saying something deadpan and snarky. Now going back to racism, how the game handles the topic is pretty lame too. It seemed like it was supposed to be a central tenet to the plot, a large reason for the Vox Populi uprising. It's so prominent at the start of the game, it teases you into thinking it might have something to say, before the topic is basically completely abandoned for timeline shenanigans. Irrational says strikingly little about racism when you consider the weight of the subject. They never really delve into how or why societies turn racist, or how it permeates in the minds of bigots and the discriminated. They don't really say anything other than, racism was a thing and that's kinda bad. This baby's first guide to racism crap just doesn't cut it for a supposedly mature game. I'll tell you what, if it weren't for some of the violence, I'd have guessed that this was a game written for 10-year-olds. Okay, the ending is a large part of why I think a lot of people rave about this game, or in some cases like my teenage self, forgive its other flaws. A AAA game trying to go in depth and grapple with such an out there concept as multiple realities should be commended, except they deal with it so poorly. It's not a thought-provoking exploration of the many worlds interpretation. Instead, Irrational uses it like a cheap magic trick played on a child, leaving you with some vague, fleeting sense of wonder, but little in the way of actual long-term substance. The game tries to quickly blow your mind rather than actually engage with it. Let's talk about Rick and Morty for a second. Memes aside, unironically, the show uses the concept of infinite realities to great effect. I mean, the show may not be super scientifically accurate, it's a silly cartoon at the end of the day, but it uses the concept as a backdrop or as a tool to go pretty in depth on some broader messages about purpose, about meaning, about relationships, about technology, about love. It doesn't just say, oh, there are multiple realities, here's a crazy plot twist, evil Morty turns into Rick, Morty is actually his own grandfather, whoa. Now clap, you peasants. Conversely, that seems to be the whole point of Infinite's existence, to seemingly just deliver that crazy twist, and once that happens, well, there's nothing else really to it. It doesn't say anything or offer anything interesting that can really stick with you. Once you get past the mindfuckery and read a forum post or watch a video explaining what just happened, well, that's it. Now you could argue that that's enough. It is, after all, just an entertainment product. You shouldn't expect it to do any more than temporarily invoke emotion, but it's often heralded as so much more than that. What does the idea of multiple realities provide to this game other than being a neat gimmick? What, that American exceptionalism and racism are bad? The whole multiple realities thing certainly didn't contribute to that message. So do the players come away with anything that's not already bleedingly obvious to everyone? And beyond that, am I dumb, or did the ending actually just make no fucking sense?
Your cornstarch the whole time, so they gotta kill you. It doesn't work.
Infinite would like you to believe that, in a million different realities, this baptism and this baptism alone is the one pivotal factor determining whether Booker turns into an evil religious cult leader or goes on to become a gambling alcoholic loser. And what? In Infinite Reality, surely there's a reality where Booker doesn't turn up for the baptism at all and becomes Comstock anyway. Or he becomes someone kinda like Comstock but doesn't build Columbia, instead he runs for president on the surface. Why is Elizabeth, who is now apparently some sort of god, arbitrarily fixated on stopping some Comstocks from existing? What about all the realities where way worse stuff happens? What about the reality where Hitler wins, or where slavery lasts for another 100 years? They try to explain this away cheaply with some shit about constants and variables, but that felt like a complete cop-out to have your infinite world's cake and eat it too. Not to mention there's the paradox of, how can Elizabeth drown Booker if she never would have existed to drown him? But whatever, regardless of all this nitpicking, Infinite's story and especially the ending just felt kinda dumb. The cartoon with dumb pickle jokes is frankly less childish somehow. He's a fucking pickle! Funniest shit I've ever seen. Rapture made sense. The discovery of plasmids, basically things that rewrote genetic material and gave you cool powers, and their widespread unregulated production were a byproduct of the free market, unfettered capitalistic nature of Andrew Ryan. It turned its users into crazy splicer addicts, which was instrumental in the demise of the city. There was an internal logic and consistency to this work of fiction that rang true. All that is thrown out the window in Infinite. Now, I said previously that Colombia kinda looks like a Disneyland but ends up being much more sinister. Again, that's a premise that has a lot of potential, but it doesn't really pan out well, because we never really got much time with the idealized version of Colombia. And soon enough, we jump into a reality where it's just a war zone like any other video game. Additionally, the world is just nonsense in so many ways. I know others have pointed this out, but why do Vigors exist in Colombia? What does it say about the society Comstock built? How are you seemingly the only one with access to them, despite the fact that they just seem to hand them out for free and are widely advertised? Hell, in an extremely religious city, wouldn't these things that resemble magic powers be rather frowned upon and boycotted for promoting witchcraft? There's a lot of little things like this I could nitpick on, and weirdly for a game praised for its maturity and immersive qualities, I couldn't help feeling throughout my playthrough that it was constantly reminding me, hey, this is a video game with a set end objective. Don't think about what you're doing, who you're fighting, why you're fighting, where you're fighting, or with what weapons. Just go from A to B, you ape-brained baby. Okay, now having said all that, the most infantilizing aspect of Bioshock Infinite is not found in the content of the game itself, but in the reaction it garnered from the players, the game journalists, and reviewers. Oh god, is this too edgy 5me? I'm going full Joker here. But just shut up and listen, okay? It'll be fine. I want to make something really clear. If you enjoyed your time with Infinite, if you thought it was a fun game, if it's one of your favorite games of all time, that's completely fine. Honestly, good for you. Maybe you enjoyed the fact that Infinite streamlined a lot of things, or you liked some of the dialogue in the game, like between the Lutez twins or with Elizabeth or whatever, or you were just really entertained by the plot and how it ended. Like, that's completely valid, and I can conceivably see people enjoying that, obviously. My issue is when people make some really big claims and they just don't back it up very well, and I just feel like it's completely unfounded. Claims like, oh, the characters are really well developed, it's a really mature, intelligent game, that the story has lots of depth and many layers to it. Frankly, I don't see it. Like a lot of people my age, I love the older COD and Halo games. I still get bouts of nostalgia for them, but I can point at their flaws and recognize them for what they are. Like Modern Warfare 2's campaign wasn't a nuanced, deep depiction of the complicated geopolitics of modern combat. Its multiplayer wasn't a super skilled, highly competitive experience. It would annoy me if people claimed that about MW2. The single player was a scuffed James Bond-esque dumb action flick, and online it was an unbalanced chaotic shitshow. Despite all that, that game was unhealthy amounts of fun. That shit was like crack to me. My point is, there are different ways to enjoy certain games. Games are a really unique medium with which to transmit all sorts of ideas and different individual experiences in ways that are just not possible in other forms of entertainment. I just wish gamers were generally a little more critical and a little less willing to throw undue praise. Maybe then, gaming can start to grow up a little.